April 18, 1943, over the North Sea at 6:40. The North Sea lay still, its surface pressed flat by cold air. 30 miles east of Helgoland, a single aircraft traced a gray arc through low stratus cloud. The Bristol Beaufighter, registration faded beneath frost, carried the sound of strained machinery, twin Hercules engines coughing through the damp. Inside, Lieutenant Alfred Kappel, aged 26, adjusted the trim by feel. The dials gave him half-truths. Oil pressure wavered. Fuel gauges jittered against the glass. The air smelled of lubricant and cold metal. Beneath him, the sea shifted like molten lead, unbroken except for the long wake of wind-driven foam. Orders were minimal. Patrol, observe, report. Radio silence, no flares, no deviation. The observer behind him kept his head down, watching the instruments with the patience of routine. Between them, only the sound of engines and the steady vibration through the seat. The aircraft was more than transport now, it was system and shelter, its hum a heartbeat that could not falter. By 06:47, the horizon moved strangely. A tremor of light in the haze. Not motion, but distortion. Vapor, perhaps, or heat rising from exhaust. Kappel narrowed his eyes, searching for pattern. The sea reflected nothing but dull steel. Still, the shimmer remained. He marked bearing 210, adjusted 1 degree. Nothing on radar, no contrails above, silence on the band. The Beaufighter continued forward, obedient to course, until obedience itself began to feel dangerous. Predictability, the enemy's most reliable weapon. The Luftwaffe knew these patrols, knew the routes and timings. System breeds safety, but safety repeats itself. Kappel's thumb brushed the signal switch, the smoke canister beneath the fuselage. It was meant for distress marking, not deception. Once triggered, the plume would betray position across miles of sky. Yet it could also break pattern, create confusion, suggest another flight's path. He hesitated. The rule was clear: no unnecessary emissions. The airframe groaned. Instruments ticked down by fractions. At 06:51, a low hum reached through the fog. Not mechanical failure, something outside. A different frequency, faint but deliberate. Twin engines, closing. The observer leaned forward. A nod. Nothing spoken. The shimmer thickened. A curve, then shadow. Enemy pursuit, still invisible but near enough that the sea began to echo it. Kappel's pulse stayed level. He counted seconds between static bursts on the radio. The pattern matched none of their own. He made his decision quietly. A single press, the canister released. Thick white smoke tore across the gray, dispersing into the mist like a wound in the weather. The Beaufighter banked left, slow and deliberate, vanishing beneath its own trail. Moments later, shapes appeared above the cloud. 2 Focke-Wulfs circling the false signal. Their guns flickered briefly, tracing empty air. The smoke carried west, marking a ghost. Kappel's aircraft slipped beneath the layer. Engines throttled low. The sea swallowed them. By 07:03, silence returned. Later, at base, the debrief was short. The patrol recorded no engagement, no loss, no confirmation. The officer of record noted initiative under unclear conditions. No commendation followed. The system did not reward instinct. It rewarded function. In the logbook, Kappel wrote only the date, time, and weather. Nothing about the shimmer or the sound or the choice. Years later, the flight remained absent from citations. Another small correction in the machinery of war. Victory belonged to systems, engines, routes, timetables. The cold logic of endurance. The record shows only this. April 18, 1943. Patrol completed. Fuel remaining. No contact. But above the North Sea, one decision altered a pattern the enemy trusted. Would you have turned the switch? Kappel had grown up near Kiel. A shipyard town, air thick with salt and the smell of steel being cut. His father worked among turbines, engines the size of houses, the noise constant enough to erase conversation. Alfred learned early that machines spoke in rhythm, not words. When the pitch changed, something was wrong. Before the war, he maintained diesel units on merchant trawlers. He listened to their balance, memorized the note of efficiency, the clean hum when all cylinders worked as one. Precision became a form of calm. His father used to say that metal rewarded attention. Ignore it, and it punished you. That same faith carried into the war. The bowfighter was no different from an engine room. Oil, vibration, measurable trust. Kappel treated the cockpit like a workshop, every lever polished smooth, every gauge aligned to his eye. He handled gun barrels with the same focus once given to turbine blades, wiped down, checked for scoring, counted turns under his breath. The smell never changed. Oil, cordite, and damp leather. It grounded him more than rank or insignia. Kappel distrusted ceremony. Medals clinked too loudly. Stories of heroism distorted function. He believed courage lived inside repetition. The act of doing the required thing, even when no one watched. Reliability was courage's quiet twin. The men in his squadron called him the mechanic who flew. It wasn't mockery. They meant it literally. He flew by diagnosis, listening for misalignment, correcting it before failure. On long patrols, his hands never rested. Each minute became an inspection. To him, survival was maintenance. His smoke generator, standard issue for distress landings, had been altered. A small valve rerouted. A reservoir expanded by hand using scrap aluminum. He'd modified it during a maintenance cycle, filing edges until the fit felt exact. No order required it. Curiosity did. The system is strongest where men still think like craftsmen. By that April morning, fog closed around his aircraft like insulation. The horizon vanished into gray. Moisture clung to the windscreen. Droplets shook loose in the vibration. He watched the altimeter settle, then rise again by a hair's width. The sea beneath was unseen, only sensed through reflected cold. Kappel adjusted the throttle slightly. The sound told him more than the dials did. One engine carried a faint lag, fuel mixture fractionally rich. He corrected it, muttering the numbers. The act was ritual, not worry. He remembered his father's workshop, the clatter of tools against steel plates, the hiss of cooling pipes. That rhythm had built his sense of order. Each problem answered by method, never impulse. Yet, as he stared into fog thick enough to erase the wingtips, he felt the weight of another question forming beneath routine. Could invention exist within obedience? The manual said no. The system demanded uniformity. But systems were designed by men who had never heard a Hercules engine falter mid-flight. He checked the pressure gauge again. The needle trembled, uncertain. No orders came through, only static, thin as breath. In that silence, he waited, not for command, but for the machine to speak first. By Euro 639, the sea and sky were indistinguishable. Only the pulse of the engines held the boundary between survival and surrender. In war, endurance belongs to the mechanism that keeps running after belief has thinned. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the compass drift. Still no signal, still alone in static. He reached once more for the modified switch, feeling the small notch he'd filed into the casing weeks before. The same motion as his father's hand, steady and exact. Invention, waiting beneath obedience. The mission was not combat. It was logistics in the air, precision shaped into flight. The bowfighter's duty was to escort a convoy of merchant vessels carrying aviation fuel from Hull to Stavanger supply points. Below, 30 ships moved at 6 knots through fog-drifted lanes, their decks coated with frost, their holds filled with liquid fire. Each tanker was a link. Together they formed a line of steel, steam, and trust. the artery of an empire at war. Above them, the Beaufighter circled as custodian, unseen but known. A node in the network, Kappel's aircraft connected refinery to runway, refinery to sortie, sortie to survival. Every victory begins as a shipment manifest. Kappel flew on bearings, not instinct. He knew the timetables by memory. Departure tides, convoy spacing, radio checks at scheduled silence intervals. The mathematics of war was punctuality. Delay equaled loss. Fuel missed by one tide meant aircraft grounded, missions canceled, lives measured against tonnage. The engines hummed without rhythm change. Their sound was the only confirmation that the system still functioned. Inside the cockpit, Kappel marked his coordinates, cross-checked against convoy drift. Each notation on his pad echoed the pulse of a larger machine. Refinery, rail, harbor, hull, propeller. The sound of machinery linked them all, a chain suspended above the waterline. At 07:10, visibility dropped again. The North Sea absorbed the ships one by one. Only the faint silhouettes of masts rose through vapor. From that height, the convoy looked immobile, frozen mid-transit, engines muffled by mist. Yet Kappel knew their speed by the pattern of his own turning radius. 6 knots, constant, reliable. The radio stayed quiet. Contact was rationed like fuel. Words consumed bandwidth, and bandwidth revealed presence. Silence was protection. He listened instead to the static, reading small shifts of tone, frequencies bending under weather and distance. The noise was his conversation with the unseen system. Beneath the wings, fog clung to the horizon in layers, gray folding into gray. A faint gleam off metal suggested the convoy's lead ship. The pattern of wakes aligned, a formation invisible on any map, yet exact as circuitry. Kappel adjusted his altitude by 200 feet, enough to preserve oversight while remaining masked. He noted the smoke plumes, small, faint columns from the merchant funnels, disciplined and steady. Each vessel kept spacing as prescribed. 9 cables between hulls. A collision would mean fire, an entire column lost to a single mistake. The order below reflected the order above. For 2 hours, he traced their perimeter. The gauges told their own arithmetic. Fuel rate, oil temperature, oxygen flow. He measured endurance against the convoy's distance to landfall. Each fluctuation, however minor, carried consequence across the entire chain. Refinery to pilot to sailor. By 09 Horse, the fog deepened. The sea surface disappeared again, replaced by textureless light. The ships continued unseen, trusting the aircraft above to sense danger first. That trust was the foundation of the system. Faith in the unseen. Discipline in repetition. Kappel's aircraft was no longer a weapon, but an extension of infrastructure. He understood that machines did not fight wars. They maintained them. The victory of one depended on the unbroken motion of thousands like it. Engines, pumps, propellers, each requiring human intuition at its weakest point. The system survives when each part believes it is ordinary. The Beaufighter continued its loop, a constant sound in constant weather. No signal, no contact, only continuity. Beneath him, unseen through fog, 30 ships pushed forward, trusting that sound to mean safety. Their course remained true. Their speed, unchanged. The system held. Would you have trusted silence that long? The first unease arrived as rhythm, not an alarm, not a sound, a difference. The engines, tuned by habit to one steady pulse, drifted from uniformity. A faint lag, then correction. The kind of change felt more than heard. The breath of imbalance in a closed system. Kappel adjusted the throttle. The gauges read normal. Oil pressure held steady. Altimeter unchanged. Yet the tone of the air shifted, a hollow between the beats. The Beaufighter's wings carried that uncertainty through cloud, slicing invisible moisture, its metal skin flexing against the cold. The horizon was gone, only gradations of gray. Cloud merged with sea, indistinguishable except for a duller sheen where the water lay. He squinted toward the dim line that separated one void from another. Nothing moved, yet motion was felt, behind or above or both. The observer leaned forward, gestured once. A contour in the mist, darker, heavier. Then it vanished. For a moment, silence became tension, measured by breath. Capel rechecked his bearing. Compass true, heading constant. Still, the pitch of the Hercules engines unsettled him. They hummed at one frequency, but the echo came back doubled, slightly off, like two machines running the same task from different rooms. He reached toward the radio. Static filled the headset. No words, no signals. Just a full, compressed noise. The kind that absorbed all meaning. The official doctrine was clear. Maintain silence unless ordered otherwise. Distress calls revealed position. Position meant target. He wrote a single line into the flight log. Possible pursuit vector, 0652. Every system demands obedience until the system itself begins to question its own rhythm. The Beaufighter held course. Cloud density increased. Condensation beaded across the canopy glass, then froze at the edges. Each vibration through the fuselage felt magnified, each second drawn longer than the one before it. Below, the convoy continued unseen, trusting its guardian to hold its pattern. The chain depended on him. One pilot, one machine, one loop of endurance above the sea. To deviate was to break rhythm. To stay meant invisibility and risk. At 0655, another sound entered the mix. Low, distant, not natural to this aircraft's tone. It came as a suggestion, the faint beating of propellers out of sync, faint but intentional. The air carried it unevenly, distorting pitch as fog shifted density. Capel's fingers hovered above the throttle quadrant. The observer tilted his head, straining. Then nothing, only static. He could have signaled command, a short pulse, a single coded phrase. But the radio's hiss warned him off. The frequency was saturated, too uniform to trust. Somewhere, someone else transmitted, or jammed. When systems overlap, silence becomes their collision point. The Beaufighter remained steady, its instruments unwavering. Yet outside, the unseen airframe persisted, pacing them through fog. Capel felt its presence as weight, a mirror shape, unseen but real, matching his altitude and turn radius. His machine trembled once, pressure from displaced air, then settled. The decision hung there. The order said, maintain silence. Instinct said, act before procedure decays into consequence. He kept the course another minute. Each tick on the clock lengthened. Each vibration hinted at proximity. By Aero 658, his hand rested near the signal switch, the modified valve he had built himself weeks earlier. The static grew thinner now, almost deliberate, like listening through fabric. Still no voice, still no order. He waited for certainty that would not come. The Beaufighter continued forward, alone in the cloud, engines carrying discipline into uncertainty. The observer stared into fog, eyes fixed on the invisible. The hum returned to its steady rhythm, but something out there, something unseen, was still keeping pace. Inside the cockpit, procedure stood like a wall. Every action had its place, every system its rule. The Beaufighter existed within that discipline. Bolts, circuits, manuals, orders. Even instinct had an assigned interval. But the rhythm had changed. The air no longer sounded clean. A foreign tone threaded through the constant drone. Faint, deliberate, too regular to be wind. Capel's hand rested near the throttle. The observer's silence behind him felt heavy. Both men knew what procedure required. Maintain position, await verification, do not deploy unauthorized countermeasures. Regulations were written for visibility, for control. This sky had neither. He recalled the rule exactly. Smoke generators are to be used only under command authority. Unauthorized discharge constitutes breach of protocol. The sentence had no warmth, no room for choice. Still, one line deeper in the same manual offered an engineer's aside. A note that exhaust emissions could distort an aircraft's silhouette, breaking optical recognition. A loophole. Not permission, but logic. He ran the equation twice in his head, as if balancing turbine pressure. The act was mechanical. Cause, effect, risk. The numbers never changed. Acting alone would expose his position to friendly and hostile alike. Waiting might invite pursuit closer. The hum deepened. A rhythm beneath rhythm. Propellers closing from the rear quadrant. Still no signal on the receiver. The frequency hissed, the kind of static that swallows transmission entirely. Capel flexed his hand once, the tendons stiff from cold. His fingers brushed the switch guard. He could feel the slight play in its hinge, something he had repaired himself weeks before. A fraction of resistance that reminded him the system was still physical, still breakable. The noise grew clearer now. Twin engines, slightly out of tune with his own. German radial, he guessed. Focke-Wulf configuration by pulse spacing. His hearing, trained by years in workshops, separated the beats. He turned his head slightly, scanning the cloud boundary. No outline, just gray movement. Yet the air pressure told the truth. There was mass nearby, another machine closing. When procedure meets proximity, discipline becomes delay. He thought of his father in Kiel. The steady sound of spanners on turbine casings. The lesson delivered without words. Machines, when cornered, reveal their truth through noise. The bowfighter vibrated, a faint tremor passing through the frame. Not turbulence, wake disturbance. The distance between pursuer and prey measured in seconds now. Capel's breath slowed. His mind reduced itself to function. Throttle, altitude, signal valve, each item locked in sequence. He imagined the convoy below, unaware, their engines trusting the unseen aircraft above. To them, he was one more mechanism in the chain. If he failed, the chain broke silently. The hum became intent. Not proximity, pursuit. He had seconds. Discipline or adaptation. Rule or survival. The doctrine said, obey until told otherwise. Instinct said, obey the machine. Capel's hand hovered, then held still. The engines maintained their tempo, waiting for command that would not come. The static folded in on itself, a perfect imitation of silence. Outside, the unseen sound moved closer, steady as fate. Systems are precise until fear demands improvisation. He inhaled once, slow, the kind of breath before labor, before motion. His eyes stayed fixed on the altimeter, but his thoughts drifted to steel benches and the smell of oil. Every rule written by man began with someone breaking one. Would you have trusted the book? Or the instinct born of oil and metal? The decision came without words. Capel's hand moved before his thoughts caught up. A controlled pull, smooth, mechanical. The auxiliary lever engaged, and a thin plume escaped the tailplane. White against gray. The exhaust thickened, twisting into the slipstream. Regulations forbade it. The manual named it deception, not defense. But the manual did not feel the rhythm closing from behind. The twin pulse that matched his own, but stayed, unseen. The first trace of smoke drifted back, curling through the cold air, dissolving, reforming. The bowfighter slowed fractionally as Capel eased the throttle down. The plume widened, its edges frayed by turbulence. From above, it would read like damage. A wounded engine, burning oil. The observer turned once, eyes meeting his. No signal, no protest, just breath, held and released. The engines maintained their low hum, the vibration constant beneath the floor plates. The white trail grew denser, folding upon itself in slow arcs, creating a wavering curtain across the flight path. It did not belong to doctrine. It belonged to instinct. Somewhere behind them, the pursuer wavered. The noise shifted, a delay in pattern, a hesitation. In the unseen space of cloud, decisions collided. Predator unsure, prey unseen. Capel held his course steady. He knew the effect would not last. The smoke, once dispersed, would leave only question. But question was time, and time meant distance. For several seconds, there was nothing but vibration and cold. The fuselage creaked under strain. Frost gathered along the canopy seals. The illusion held. The bowfighter now trailing what looked like exhaust failure, the kind that marked an easy kill or a lost cause. The unseen rhythm broke. A new tone, faint, metallic, entered, then receded. A shift of propeller wash told its story. One aircraft altering direction. The pursuer had turned. Neither man spoke. The observer released his breath slowly, fogging the glass. The static in their headsets remained, a constant reminder of isolation. The smoke thinned as air currents carried it away. What remained was the faint, drifting residue of burned fuel. A line of defiance written across the sky. The bowfighter resumed climb power, engines stabilizing at 2100 revolutions. Capel did not look back. The instrument stayed within limits. The logbook lay open on his knee, the last entry untouched since 0652. He considered adding another note, a record of deviation, but closed the pad instead. Some acts belonged only to the air. The horizon began to clear. The gray flattened into pale light. Below, the sea continued its endless motion, unaltered by what had occurred above it. The convoy, still miles beneath, moved in formation, unknowing. The rule had been broken. The pursuit was gone. The bowfighter continued its patrol. A machine returned to duty, carrying a secret in its exhaust line. No commendation, no reprimand, just the return of normal sound. The sky was quiet again. Would you have pulled the lever? Minutes passed. The hum of the bowfighter settled back into rhythm, a steady thrum over the North Sea. The air was colder now, thinner. Nothing moved but cloud. Then, through the static, a pattern broke. A series of clipped transmissions, distant, distorted. Words caught between frequencies. Engaged. Sector South. Returning fire. Static swallowed the rest. Capel listened without reaction. His eyes stayed on the fuel dials, methodical, exact. Every number meant distance, every fluctuation a calculation of endurance. The transmission repeated, stronger this time, from the control station at base. A southern escort formation under attack. Enemy fighters identified. Focke-Wulf 190s. Likely the same patrol that had shadowed his course. He did not speak. The observer noted coordinates, underlined once, then closed the log. Their own sector remained quiet. The bowfighter convoy continued its route, its formation intact, its timetable undisturbed. Below, the ocean carried its slow pulse. Merchant ships, 14 in line, pushed through the fog with their navigation lights shielded. On the lead tanker, a sailor on watch saw a faint streak dissolving in the air above. It looked like exhaust, or the residue of cloud turbulence. He turned away, noting nothing. The engines of his ship kept burning their measured tone, a heartbeat of industry moving through mist. No one aboard those ships knew a decision had been made above them. No one logged it. The convoy passed without interference, each hull marking a coordinate on an invisible chain that linked refinery, airfield, and front line. In logistics, absence is the true measure of success. The system celebrates what does not happen, Elsewhere, 20 miles south, the sounds were different. Reports later described the interception as brief but violent. An escort group hit by a sudden strike, 2 losses, 1 damaged. The attackers disengaged before reinforcements could scramble. The incident closed within minutes. Back in Kappel's logbook, the final entry remained unchanged. Fuel levels nominal. Wind south by southwest. No enemy sighted. The page ended clean. He could have claimed foresight. He could have reported the anomaly, written his instincts into the record. Instead, he filed the report as routine. The airframe, he noted, performed within tolerance. Nothing more. The smoke trail that had misled the pursuers was already gone. Scattered into the wider weather system, its last trace absorbed by the wind. What lingered was silence, the kind of silence that holds everything steady. The convoy reached its refueling point by dusk. Cargo intact. Timetable met. The chain continued, one link after another, without acknowledgement of what had been prevented. No commendation. No reprimand. Only the next mission order, printed and folded. Kappel flew again 3 days later, his record unchanged. His decision, unauthorized, invisible, never entered the archives, but the absence of loss remained. A blank line in a ledger of statistics. The convoy lived because of a choice no one saw. Would you have claimed credit or remained silent, knowing silence kept the system whole? By the time the Beaufighter touched down, the incident had already been filed. The convoy was confirmed safe, the chain intact. No enemy sightings recorded in their sector. The mission entered the system as successful, routine, uneventful. In the debrief room, the air smelled of metal polish and cold paper. A clerk typed the after-action summary, the keys clicking with indifferent precision. The official entry read, "Unverified smoke discharge. Cause, mechanical test." No elaboration followed. The document passed from desk to desk without comment, the ink drying into quiet permanence. Kappel stood before the table. He read the note once. Then he signed his name in the lower margin. Measured, neat, exact. The signature aligned perfectly with the ruled line beneath, the same way he had signed hundreds before. His commanding officer looked up only briefly. A nod. Nothing more. No questions. No reprimand. The system had no appetite for stories that did not disrupt the timetable. The convoy had reached port. The fuel had been delivered. Every aircraft had returned. The arithmetic balanced. In total war, efficiency is its own morality. The machine rewards results, not reasons. The conversation ended without a word exchanged. The papers were stacked, clipped, and shelved. In the corridor, the muffled rhythm of typewriters carried through the walls like the ticking of a clock. Each keystroke marked another mission, another report, another decision absorbed into procedure. Outside, the hangar doors stood open to the wind. The Beaufighter rested under its tarp. Oil streaked along the undercarriage, salt drying white on the fuselage. Mechanics moved around it with steady pace, checking pressure lines, tightening bolts, logging hours flown. The smoke generator was inspected, cleaned, and marked for calibration. A note was penciled. Valve irregularity suspected. Cause undetermined. Kappel watched them work. Their movements were exact, unspoken. Every wrench turn had the rhythm of routine, not curiosity. The machine, like the war, continued its cycle. He removed his gloves, folding them flat before tucking them into his belt. No one mentioned the smoke. No one needed to. The incident fit neatly into the logic of function, an anomaly corrected by record. Procedure, like an organism, reabsorbed deviation until the system appeared whole again. By nightfall, the logbook was closed. The hangar lights dimmed one by one. The sound of engines in the distance marked the next sortie, preparing for dawn. Kappel lingered by the aircraft's nose, tracing the rivets along the frame. The metal was cold, the surface clean. In his reflection, he saw no expression. only the uniform outline of another technician in service to continuity. The rule had been broken once, perfectly. It would never be repeated. Procedure had closed the loop. The deviation erased itself, leaving no mark except endurance. The convoy survived. The chain held. The system endured. There was no medal, no mention in dispatches. The report filed under routine operations, unremarkable. The smoke was listed as a test emission. The flight noted as successful, nothing more. But across the North Sea that afternoon, a chain of consequence remained unbroken. A tanker convoy advanced without loss. The fuel reached its destination. Timetables aligned, routes cleared, engines kept turning. Somewhere in that arithmetic, survival had depended on a small, unauthorized act. A man's decision expressed through a lever and a stream of white vapor. Kappel's name never entered the record of distinction. It circulated instead in the informal talk between pilots, half-remembered, unverified. The smoke that scared off a Focke-Wulf, they said, a rumor that faded between postings, replaced by newer ones. Yet systems endure through such unrecorded instincts. Moments where procedure bends just enough to preserve the larger machine. In the years that followed, his service log remained ordinary, hours flown. Missions completed, maintenance performed. Nothing marked him different from the others who served under the hum of engines and the certainty of schedules. The hangars where they worked still stand in places. Oil stains darken the floors, resistant to cleaning. Metal tools rest in drawers that close with a sound unchanged by time. The air, even decades later, holds the dry scent of lubricant and cold steel. These were the true monuments, not of marble or inscription, but of endurance through precision. Aviation historians later reconstructed the day's events. They traced the patrol patterns, the convoy routes, the intercepted German radio transmissions. They found evidence of an enemy flight diverted south at the same hour. The conclusion remained uncertain. Coincidence or consequence, impossible to prove. The file stayed closed. What remains certain is function. The convoy delivered its cargo. The system completed its cycle. And inside that system, Kappel's act existed as an invisible weld. Unseen, but load-bearing. Systems survive not through perfection, but through the quiet corrections made by those who understand their rhythm. By war's end, the aircraft were decommissioned. The men dispersed into civilian trades. Kappel returned to engineering work, anonymous again among turbines and factory noise. The skills that once served the war became part of peacetime machinery. The same attention to calibration, the same silence in success. Even now, when the hangar doors open to wind and rust, the old marks remain. Streaks of oil where hands once rested, small evidence of a discipline that outlasted its witnesses. The echo of a system maintained by those who asked no credit, who only listened for what the machine required. History remembers victories by outcome, not by correction. But sometimes the difference between both lies in a single, unseen decision. A man who turned a valve, and in doing so, turned away disaster. Perhaps that is the truest courage, to adjust the mechanism, knowing no one will ever know why. Would you have done the same? March 2nd, 1945, Western Germany, a damp fog clings to the low hills around a rural crossroad north of the Rhine. Frost still grips the grass. Water beads on armor plates, gathering in slow movement along cold steel seams. A Sherman tank waits with engine idling at a steady interval. 4 cycles, 1 breath. 4 cycles, another breath. The rhythm of timed explosions remains the only sign of motion in a field that has not yet decided to wait. Inside the hull, Private First Class William Bill Arden, 30, watches through a narrow visor slit. He studies the road ahead, a faint curve beneath the mist, while the rest of the world hides behind gray. Orders remain static. Hold position. Reconnaissance must confirm withdrawal of German forces. The rule is simple. The tank's strongest armor faces forward. The weak side must never meet a gun barrel. Every manual prints the same principle. Every instructor repeats it. Training turns it into instinct. Angle away from any suspected anti-tank threat. Never move toward the muzzle. Toward means mistake. Toward means the steel breaks. But Arden keeps seeing small details that authority cannot measure. The ditch to the left looks soft from the night's rain. The field to the right holds wheel ruts that disappear into open ground. A trap if the fog conceals distance. Ahead, the curve gives cover to anyone who knows how to wait. Silence settles over the machine. No voices, only the slow growl of forced air through the engine vents and the faint ticking of cooling metal. Then it arrives. A single metallic crack breaks the morning. Not thunder, not random debris, a shot from somewhere ahead. Distant, but exact. A first ranging round. It does not hit. It does not need to. The silence afterward is confirmation that someone is watching back. Arden keeps his eyes narrow, following where the sound might align with contours. The fog thins just enough to show a darker line against a hedge. Static creeps across the tank's internal radio. Words are there, but distance and weather fold them into noise. Platoon commander repeats the same directive. Hold. Trust the system. Trust the map. Trust the assumption that the enemy is falling away from the Rhine. Arden breathes once. The air inside feels mechanical, filtered. Lacking warmth, he shifts his boot on the pedal. One small movement, the kind that does not trip alarms. His hand rests on the control stick. The tank's turret stays forward, dutiful and blind. But Arden's thoughts tilt toward the threat instead of away from it, toward the barrel hidden in the fog, toward the source of the crack that broke the rule. Another pause, longer than expected. The ground waits. Arden considers the timing between rounds. The next one could arrive without warning. He pictures angles, distances, the seconds it takes for steel to cross open ground. Manuals cannot calculate a field softened by rain. In the quiet, instinct grows louder. Would you keep waiting, trusting a printed rule? Or would you turn the weight of steel into the danger? Before the danger finishes measuring you. Before the war, Bill Arden worked in a Detroit machine shop. He arrived before sunrise, punching the same dented time clock that marked thousands of precise mornings. Turbine housings sat under bright lamps while he calibrated each unit with measured pressure. His palms learned to read steel by feel alone. Heat told a story. Vibration revealed error. Balance decided whether a part would survive rotation or tear itself apart. Machines demanded respect, quiet, exact respect. That discipline made sense in a world where measurements were constant and consequences were predictable. He remembers the streetcar rides home, uniformed men talking about sports and shifts. His clothes always smelled of hot oil. On weekends, he helped neighbors fix tractors, tightening bolts in correct order. Stability came from following rules that never changed. Angles, torque, tolerance. A system protected the people who honored it. Bill kept his head down and worked. He believed reliability was a form of duty. Inside the Sherman, those habits returned. He tapped each switch twice before engaging, counted gear changes under his breath. He listened for any mismatch between track and engine tone. A sign of mud, misalignment, or stress. The others laughed, saying he thought more like the tank than a soldier. The loader joked that Bill could diagnose a loose bracket blindfolded. Arden never reacted. The machine was not a joke. Here, steel kept them alive. A missed detail had weight. The fog outside makes the hull feel smaller. The engine's idle thrum pushes through the floor. Arden rests his hand near the control handle and reviews everything he can control. Fuel pressure steady, coolant cycling, turret locks engaged. No problems. But the environment refuses to give reassurance. The field ahead offers no certainty. Doctrine assumes direction of threat. The manual gives comfort in print. Yet steel in the real world absorbs forces paper cannot consider. He thinks of his father's voice, an older man formed by the factories before the Great Depression. Metal survives by leaning into pressure, he had said. Running from force only gives it more to break. Arden never questioned that logic. Machines exist to push back. They hold lines. They do not retreat from a threat they can confront. A gust of damp air pushes a faint chill through gaps in the hatch. Arden adjusts his helmet, eyes still on the visor's narrow frame of visibility. The memory of Detroit lingers. Concrete floors, rows of equipment, everything arranged to reduce risk. War removes the guardrails. Here, the ground becomes enemy. Weather reshapes the rules. He feels a strain not in the engine, but in geometry. The Sherman's armor sits angled wrong for whatever waits at the curve. Exposed side. Vulnerable seam. Time stretches between radio messages. Authority insists patience saves lives. But authority does not feel the tremor of steel wanting to move. Arden checks the handle again. 1 millimeter of tension. A system can protect or delay. If you were responsible for the weight that carries 4 lives, would you keep trusting the rule or trust the steel beneath your hands? This platoon is not alone. It is one column in a planned advance stretching kilometers behind and ahead. Fuel trucks, spare parts, ammunition carriers, all depend on this road remaining open and efficient. Each delay sends consequences forward. Infantry at the riverbank rely on armor to secure the left flank before daylight strengthens enemy resolve. The system measures success in minutes saved, not shells fired. A crossroads like this becomes essential ground. If held, supply flows. If blocked, momentum freezes. A single disabled tank could turn timetable into immobility. Arden keeps that structure in mind. He knows the Sherman beneath him is more than a weapon. It is cargo, speed, and shield, scheduled to arrive at precise intervals. Officers miles behind use maps and radio bursts to track those arrivals. Fuel consumption is translated into time math. Distance becomes duration. Even the return of static on the radio introduces drift in the plan. Doctrine states that armor must push only in coordination, never acting alone. Unseen threats are to be bypassed, not challenged without certainty. Forward motion protects the clock. The tank's radio ticks again in its regulated pattern. Fuel level remains steady. Track tension unchanged. Turret rotation nominal. These details feed the system's confidence that this segment of steel can carry its weight across this sector. But Arden studies the environment with a machinist's suspicion. The damaged barn marking the turn is too intact on one side. Impact scars only face the road they now occupy. To the right, the ditch runs straight. Perfect alignment for an ambush crew trained to exploit routine. He calculates response time. 5 seconds to reverse from idle. 6 seconds more to pivot away enough to change the angle of exposure. 10 seconds to be hit if he keeps obeying procedure. Numbers in his head fall into place as clearly as turbine measurements once did. Doctrine expects tanks to favor the path of least vulnerability. German gunners expect that too. The system's advantage becomes a pattern the enemy can aim at. Another gust moves the fog. Moisture beads on the periscope glass. Arden feels the slight climb of engine temperature. Impatience warming steel. The loader shifts his weight, unaware of how his motion affects balance. Small things matter in confined machinery. Arden's fingers apply pressure to the control lever, stopping just short of movement. Waiting for certainty means waiting for a second shot. The hedge beyond the bend hides skill. A German crew lies there, well-trained, armed with mathematics of their own. They know distances, angles, and hesitation. They predict the moment when a Sherman will start to turn away. One shell timed correctly can remove not just one tank, but the schedule it was built to keep. The entire Allied advance depends on predictability. Predictability feeds the supply line, but predictability also feeds a gunner waiting for steel to follow the rulebook. Arden breathes once. Decisions affecting miles of men rest inside one fog-covered intersection. If the system demands stability, the wind shifts with a low sweep across the fields, pushing damp air westward. A faint scent rides the movement. Burnt cordite, sharp and chemical, too recent to belong to distant batteries. Arden lifts his chin slightly. His senses listen beyond instruction. Training taught him to trust machines. Experience taught him to trust absence more. Something unseen has already disturbed the air. Behind a farmhouse wrapped in fog, birds erupt upward in sudden unison. Their wings beat panic against the morning stillness. Not a gradual rise, a single synchronized flight. Arden follows their path with a narrow field of view through the periscope. The flock's starting point aligns with the curve ahead. A blind angle. A gunner's sanctuary. A second metallic crack arrives without warning, sharper and more precise than the first. Soil bursts upward near the roadside. Clumps flung like gravel thrown by invisible force. The energy feels directed now, not exploratory. The commander claims it is stray artillery overshooting from deeper lines. Procedure prefers that explanation, but the ground's reaction argues intention. Radio static intrudes on the comm inside the Sherman. A nearby platoon reports losing a tank only minutes ago. No visual contact, no discovered threat, only destruction arriving from nowhere. The operator's voice wavers beneath the static, trying to sound controlled. Arden hears what the officers do not. Fear trimmed into professionalism. The fog holds subtle truths. One patch forms a gap too exact to be natural, like a curtain pulled aside just enough for aim. Arden finds a barn window missing its glass, yet the shards do not glitter below it. They were removed cleanly to create a field of fire. He notices a small puddle by the ditch. No breeze touches the surface, yet a ripple spreads outward, a vibration carried through earth. Machines communicate danger through tension. So does terrain. Inside the hull, the loader tries humor again. Something about Arden wanting to calculate geometry before breakfast. The joke falls into silence. Arden keeps his eyes forward. He presses his foot lightly on the gear pedal, feeling the engine's prepared response. The machine anticipates command. Steel wants movement. Another stretch of quiet descends. Too long to be peace. Every second without a sound suggests a German crew perfecting their correction. The hidden barrel takes measurements no one else respects. It has learned their angle. It has learned their obedience. The commander repeats the rule. Maintain formation. Angle away from any suspected gun. Doctrine demands turning vulnerability from threat. Arden knows the rule by heart. He knows the thickness of their side armor. He knows what a perfect hit does to it. Manuals cannot smell burning propellant. Moisture condenses on the periscope glass. Arden wipes a narrow arc, clearing a slit of vision. A faint glint pierces the gray, a reflection too straight for foliage. The moment vanishes as fog folds over it again. But the memory of shape remains precise in his mind. Metal hides behind leaves. His breathing slows. Calculations assemble in his head. Distance, trajectory, timing between shots. It is not instinct alone, it is pattern. The German gunner is ready, waiting for them to remain angled wrong, waiting for the next second of indecision. War often favors those who fire first. Ambush favors those who wait. Arden stares into a horizon that refuses to reveal itself. If a silent threat already holds aim on your breath, how long should you sit still and let it finish the math? The commander's voice arrives through the internal radio, steady and controlled. Maintain formation. Angle left. Do not expose the thinner front armor. Hold position until reconnaissance confirms the enemy has withdrawn. Doctrine repeats itself through static. Firm in the belief that procedure protects life, Arden keeps his eyes forward, but his focus drifts to the numbers living beneath the steel. Side armor thickness is known. Deflection angles are proven. Every manual reinforces the same equation. Protection grows as the silhouette narrows. Turning away is designed to save the crew. But Arden's instincts challenge the calculation. Years spent reading the tremor of machines taught him when tension signals risk. Here, the ground dictates geometry. The ditch constrains retreat. The turn ahead forces exposure. If the next shell lands 10 inches deeper, a crewman dies before anyone names the threat. A direct side hit ends everything in half a second. A frontal hit, even if lethal, still gives the machine a chance to resist. Steel fighting steel. The rule assumes visibility, assumes breathing room, assumes the luxury of knowing direction. Fog removes those assumptions. The loader reloads his joke, light-hearted, unaware of how thin the line becomes between humor and silence. Arden does not respond. He listens to the engine pulse under his seat. Heat building, vibration shifting. Steel knows the approach of danger. A machine under threat carries a different rhythm. His palm hovers over the control lever. A tiny shift, and the Sherman will pivot right, toward the threat. Toward the muzzle that hunts them, orders insist the enemy is falling back. But the odor of cordite says a gun waits. The wind from the west says the barrel is ready. The stillness around the farmhouse says trained eyes stare into fog. Doctrine cannot smell the chemical trail of a recent discharge. Procedure cannot hear a puddle ripple from ground percussion. A rulebook cannot notice where silence becomes too perfect. Arden checks the periscope again. Still fog. Still nothing. Yet the next shot will arrive soon. The enemy has the easier task. Wait for the American tank to act predictably. Every second that passes reduces their options. The platoon sits angled away from danger because that is what the system expects. Protection by rule becomes vulnerability by routine. The commander repeats his instruction. Maintain the angle. Trust the doctrine. Trust distance. Arden hears the tone more than the words. A belief in stability shaped by maps and training, not by the texture of the field beneath them. Rules exist to prevent panic. But these rules were written far from this road, far from a hedgerow hiding a barrel aimed at predictable steel. Arden's hand grips the lever. His boot applies measured pressure to the pedal. Not enough to move, yet. The engine reacts anyway, its voice deepening. The machine asks for direction. He imagines his father's guidance. Metal survives by meeting pressure. Retreat feeds force. A barrel trained on your weakness wants you to obey instruction. The quiet voice in Arden's head tells him routine has become a trap. Another breath. Another calculation. The enemy gunner prepares to fire where the Sherman should be. Not where it could be if instinct overrules command. If waiting allows a hidden hand to choose the moment of destruction, who should decide when steel changes direction? The order on the radio? Or the man who feels the machine? Arden does not announce his decision. He does not ask permission. The lever moves under his grip, firm and final. The Sherman jerks hard to the right, treads biting into wet earth with a grinding roar that cuts through the morning fog. The machine swings against doctrine, pivoting toward the suspected barrel. The sudden motion throws the loader against the ammunition rack. The commander slams a hand against the hatch rim, shouting frustration and disbelief. Procedure has been broken in one violent, decisive turn. The tank's weight digs trenches into soft ground. Mud lifts and snaps beneath steel. The engine, surprised by the demand, responds with rising force. Compression, fuel, ignition, working without hesitation. The crew stares forward now, facing the unseen threat head-on. The very position every manual warns against. Thin protection behind them. Strong armor in front. Arden breathes once, shallow and trained. The next blast arrives instantly. A metallic scream tears the air. The German shell reaches for the space where the Sherman should have been, where a rule-bound crew would still be sitting. But the turn denies it. Instead, it slams into the thick frontal armor, glancing away with sparks and ripped earth. The tank shudders, but structure holds. The ricochet's howl disappears into the fog, evidence of mathematics disrupted. Silence returns for half a second. Then adrenaline replaces it. Arden forces a slow acceleration, not enough to expose new ground, just enough to ruin prediction. 5 meters of shift, 2 seconds of unpredictability, enough for a gunner to lose certainty. The German crew now must recalculate. Angle lost, timing broken. They hunted vulnerability and instead meet resistance. Inside, breath tightens. The commander tries to restore order, trying to pull protocol back into the machine. His voice pushes urgency. Identify target, confirm direction, request supporting fire. Arden does not stop listening. He simply prioritizes survival over procedure. Hands trained in Detroit tighten around the mechanism that steers survival. Caution has become calculated aggression. Moisture rolls down the visor glass. Fog thins just enough to reveal the suggestion of movement along the hedgerow. A shift in tone, not shape. A weapon prepares a second shot. Arden aligns the hull, giving the gunner a clean arc. The loader steadies ammunition, no longer joking. Another round blasts from the hidden emplacement. This one lands short, ground erupting in dark soil. They are no longer predictable. The enemy's advantage crumbles under 10 degrees of defiance. The Sherman continues forward, the machine expressing its weight with purpose. Treads crush wet grass, turret gears hum. Arden's choices pull the entire platoon into a new equation. They now face the threat rather than flee from it. The gunner whispers a direction, half seen, half sensed. The crew regains rhythm, not the one taught, the one necessary. Arden's mind remains mechanical. Torque, traction, leverage, steel against distance. He thinks like the tank. He thinks like the danger. The suppressed instinct that doctrine warned against becomes the variable that keeps them alive. In this moment, the war narrows to the space inside one pivot. The system demanded obedience. The ambush demanded deviation. Arden chose pressure over retreat. He chose to interrupt the enemy's certainty. The rule is broken. The machine continues forward. Section 7 moments pass without result. The hedgerow stays still. The fog closes in again, folding back over the damaged earth. Arden holds his position, neither advancing into the unknown nor reverting to the vulnerability he defied. The commander breathes hard through the radio line, but offers no reprimand now. The machine's stance has changed the battlefield's math. Nothing moves in the space where a second kill shot should have arrived. The platoon's gunners adjust elevation. Coaxial fire tests the angles ahead. Short bursts thudding into vegetation to disturb concealment. No return fire answers. The earlier certainty of danger turns into quiet confusion. Procedure pulls itself back together. Formation reforms. Radios resume rhythm. The tank next in line takes Arden's turn as its new orientation. Doctrine adapts under pressure whether it admits it or not. The steel vocabulary of the platoon shifts because one man refused silence. Arden's breathing slows. His hands remain steady on controls that moments earlier decided outcome. Minutes later, a separate channel interrupts routine. A distant unit, advancing along a parallel road, reports unexpected progress. An unseen kill zone once mapped for armored destruction now lies inactive. No losses taken. No ambush triggered. Their route holds clear, static crackles. Then confirmation. That road was meant for tanks like these. A prepared trap waiting for a column moving on schedule and by the printed rules. Something forced the unseen gunners to abandon their sequence. Something disrupted the timing that would have killed crews miles away. Inside the Sherman, no one comments. But the weight of implication settles over steel. Infantry finally sweeps the hedgerow that had threatened them. The search turns up the evidence. A German anti-tank cannon sits behind a mask of branches. Breach open. One shell jammed halfway into chamber. The crew fled their post, leaving tools scattered in mud. Tire marks lead west, escaping into deeper fields. No bodies, no firefight. just absence where lethal hands once worked. Officers on the ground record the find as malfunction. Reports upstream list it as inaccurate fire from a rushed position. Coincidence becomes the official explanation. Paperwork saves time by ignoring uncertainty. The platoon is told to press on. No mention of a turn made against instruction. No citation for judgment. Only a return to timetable. Arden accepts the quiet return to order. His gloves reset switches into standard configuration. He counts the gears aloud again, just loud enough for habit to acknowledge its own endurance. The engine temperature stabilizes through coolant lines that continue their duty. Mud begins to dry along the tracks. The machine remains functional. The crew remains breathing. Nothing appears changed. Yet everything has shifted by a single rotation of steel on wet soil. The radio clicks to life with new coordinates. The column advances, timing restored, mission unchanged. Only the tank's path through Earth marks where instinct challenged rule. Fog swallows that mark soon enough, leaving no trace for those who did not witness. The battlefield rarely announces what did not happen. It records explosions, not the choices that prevented them. Lives saved seldom register where statistics ignore absence. Arden leans forward, visor narrow, hands ready. In a war measured by supply lines and schedules, who tallies the disasters avoided because one driver refused to wait for permission? Section 8 by early afternoon, the platoon withdraws into a field lager screened by low hedges and supply vehicles. Engines wind down into clicking metal rhythms as heat bleeds from exhaust ports. Maintenance crews move in practiced paths, fuel cans lifted, track pins checked, grease pressed into joints that must endure another crossing. The war continues its schedule, indifferent to moments that altered its timing. The Sherman that broke formation takes its assigned resting space. Mud still clings to treads in thick slabs. The hull's underside drips water from the ditch it carved. A single scar curves along its frontal armor, a mark left by the shell that should have ended them. The crew looks at the mark, but says very little. Everyone understands its meaning. Officially, that meaning must remain unspoken. The commander summons Arden behind a line of parked trucks, where the noise is low enough for discipline to sound measured. His words come without anger. Initiative acknowledged. Protocol violated. Action noted as effective. Method recorded as unacceptable. The balance is exact. Praise withheld to preserve structure. Consequences softened to respect outcome. Performance and obedience remain separate columns to be evaluated independently. A report will document everything neutrally. Enemy fire misjudged range. Maneuver unplanned. The phrasing will protect the system from explaining why instinct succeeded where doctrine lacked variables. Arden does not argue. He stands as though hearing an equipment inspection, absorbing information, making no claim of credit. His uniform gathers dust along sleeves from where he steadied himself during the pivot. He brushes none of it away. Nearby, his crew begins quiet servicing. The loader runs a gloved hand over the impact groove, following the path where heat and momentum shaved steel. The gunner checks elevation gears, listening for any grind concealed by victory. The assistant driver tests hatch latches twice, adopting Arden's habits without announcing adoption. A survival shared becomes a lesson kept between men, not passed up the chain. A mechanic approaches with a paint stick, considering whether the scar should be sealed. Arden watches the decision. The mechanic leaves it for now. The mark stands as a thin reminder that the manual does not always predict which direction danger comes from. Convoys arrive from rear echelons. Fuel drums roll into rows. Crates of rations stack beside ammunition pallets. Radios chirp updates on new objectives. The machine of war continues because supply lines remain unbroken. No ledger will note the distance preserved by a forbidden turn. No staff officer will mark that schedule maintained owes itself to a single disobedient hand. The commander ends his reprimand with a final line. Procedure is what keeps soldiers alive. Arden simply nods. His thoughts return to a machine shop floor in Detroit, where ignoring the vibration in a bearing could destroy a turbine, even when gauges promised tolerance. Sometimes the tool knows before the technician. Sometimes steel warns before sight does. He walks back to the Sherman, climbs inside, and resumes the seat that holds the future of 4 lives. Checklists continue. Controls reset. Breath measured. Time obeyed. The next mission will treat him as another operator of another tank in another advance. Routine resumes its authority with silent expectation. No medal mentions the absence of explosions. No citation honors a convoy that never stalled. Quiet survival leaves no monument. Only those who witnessed remember. When instinct interrupts protocol and keeps the system moving, should history reward the rule that broke, or the man who bent it? The war does not pause for reflection. By nightfall, the map extends arrows farther east. Convoys load before daylight. Fuel trucks roll, their engines churning schedules into motion. Arden's platoon becomes one part of a larger advance. Metal pushing through land measured in logistical increments. None of those miles attached to his name. He remains a driver, designated by rank and roster. One man inside a vehicle registered only as weight and firepower. Reports from the day list, no exceptional actions. The near ambush is filed as miscalculated artillery. The hidden gun labeled abandoned under pressure from multiple threats. Procedure retakes the narrative with clean lines free of uncertainty. Staff officers log successful progress. Timetables regained. The mission acknowledges only visible effects. Intact tanks, open road, fuel consumption matching expectation. Arden returns to the Sherman once maintenance concludes. The hull cools, metal contracting as heat gives way to darkness. The tank sits rigid, like a machine that understands purpose fulfilled. Its scar from the deflected shot remains unpainted for now, a thin memory in steel. Most will pass by without noticing, but Arden recognizes the trace of a trajectory that should have ended existence. Steel remembers pressure. Men do as well. The crew performs final checks with subdued concentration. The gunner runs sight alignment twice. The loader adjusts stowage straps with unusual care. Routine tasks hold extra meaning after the margin for error narrows to one decision. No words mark that shift. Silent acknowledgement replaces ceremony. Survival changes people without announcement. Elsewhere across the front, a different set of tanks drives forward unchallenged, occupying ground that might have become ruin had an unseen barrel kept firing. Their crews may never learn what they avoided. Their logs will record miles, not narrow escapes. Logistics victories rarely attract attention. They appear as schedules functioning correctly. The absence of disaster leaves no headline. Yet war's efficiency depends on exactly such absences. Quiet choices that prevent interruption shape outcomes more than dramatic clashes remembered in books. The industrial philosophy of this conflict, that movement and supply decide victory, relies on those who feel danger before doctrine updates policy. Systems take time to recognize patterns. Instinct responds immediately. Arden sits in the driver's position, visor dark, engine silent. He reviews the gear pattern in his mind. Hands rest on levers like they would in a workshop before dawn, trusting steel to communicate limits. He expects no commendation. The system does not reward deviation, even when deviation preserves the system. The night deepens. Radios crackle low traffic. Fuel tallies, route markers, weather forecasts. A generator hums behind the maintenance tents. Nearby, the Sherman's engine clicks its final cooling note. Calm returns to the field as preparation replaces tension. Tomorrow will demand the same precision. The rulebook will remain unchanged, but Arden will carry the knowledge that some pages require amendment when fog hides angles the authors did not consider. History records the armored divisions that crossed rivers and cities. It seldom mentions the drivers who decided which moment belonged to movement and which moment demanded defiance. Forgotten tank operators shaped outcomes one lever pull at a time. Quiet survival leaves a question behind. Would you have turned toward the shot?